Good evening, everyone. It's 6 o'clock, and I'd like to welcome you all to the meeting of the Lower Thames Crossing Task Force on Monday, the 16th of October 2023. Please be aware the meeting is being recorded and live streamed, and the recording will be made available on the Council's website. Just before we get into the agenda, can I just check that anyone that's joining us remotely on MS Teams can hear what's going on in the room, please?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. I can hear. I don't know about Laura.
Yes, I can hear loud and clear. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you both. Item 1, apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. We've had an apology from Councillor Muldowney.
Thank you very much. Item 2, the minutes. Hope everyone's had a chance, so they've been circulated. I move that the minutes of the Lower Thames Crossing Task Force meeting held on the 17th of July 2023 be approved as a correct record. I've asked Democratic Services to include the Lower Thames Crossing Action Group and Robert Quick into the names of attendees at that meeting. Does any other comments or accuracy on those minutes? Now I move those minutes be adopted. All agreement? Thank you. Item 3, urgent items of business. I have not agreed to any items of urgent business this evening. And we're moving on to declarations of interest. Item 4. Does anyone wish to declare a declaration of interest? None. Thank you very much. And with that, we'll be going on to item 5, which is our final item on the agenda today. It's a verbal update on the first 3 months of the DCO examination of Lower Thames Crossing. And Mark Bradbury to present with Chris Stratford online. Over to you, please, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in discussions with the Chair, we agreed that whilst meeting monthly to basically talk about what had happened at the examination might not be a productive use of time, it would be useful to have a sort of half-time update. We're slightly over halfway through the examination now. It's due to close on the 20th of December. And we thought now would be a good time to get a view on what's happened to date, make sure that any outstanding concerns, at least we had the opportunity to input those into the process. And then we'll meet again following conclusion of the process to give a recap on where we think the decision might go, or at least the recommendation might go from the examiners, and what the next steps are. So we've been providing you with regular sort of written updates, and the update circulated for this meeting is just another version of that. But obviously both Chris and Laura have been heavily involved in the process, have been to many of the meetings. I've attended a number, particularly at the preliminary stages, just to make sure that the stage was set and that we were well resourced. But I think, yes, we could go line by line through the report, but I don't think that's terribly helpful with your agreement, Chair, and with the agreement of Laura and Chris. What I think might be more helpful for you is for them to give you a quick recap of their views on where we're at, where the tone is going. I'm sure there'll be plenty of comment about the challenging nature of the process for a project this complex, with the amount of preparation that we've all had. And I think it's fair to say that I suspect the examiners will also perhaps now realise a little bit more as to the scale of this. And I'm not suggesting that given a second chance they might have given us a deferral, but it has been quite intense. And I know that certainly our team and Chris at the spearhead of that have worked tirelessly to meet the deadlines, to respond as professionally as we can in the time that we've had available to us. But it has been an enormously challenging process. And as I say, I want to put on record the thanks for the team on behalf of the Council the efforts they've made to date, and for Laura and her colleagues for supporting us in that. And also, I think it's fair to say our relationship with a number of other key parties in the borough who have been engaged in the process as well, the various port operators and others. I think it has been a concerted effort, but there is plenty still to do. So with that, Chris, are you happy that you take the stage and just give a quick recap on your perceptions to date?
Yes. Okay.
Sorry, Chris, just for the benefit of the recording, Councillor Bates just joined the meeting.
Oh, of course. Okay. Yes, the deadline 5 submission. There are 10 deadlines. The last deadline, deadline 10, is not actually a submission deadline. It's just a closure. So the last deadline is deadline 9 on the 15th of December, where we will probably make some submissions. We have done deadline 5 now on the 3rd of October, and deadline 6 is coming up on the 31st of October. And hard on the heels of that is deadline 7 on the 17th of November. Deadline 6 arguably could be the hardest one, because not only are we trying to review 103 documents from the deadline 4 submissions of National Highways, but also the 40 document submissions from their deadline 5 submission. So that's 143 documents we're going through, some of which will be pretty minor, but some won't. We're also responding to the next batch of examination authority questions. There were 77 issued last week, of which the council will be responding to 27 of them. So it's a very similar onerous task to the 30 we had to do the first time round. But we're also commenting on responses to a whole range of documents that other people have put in as well. So there's an enormous amount going on, and we will have, also we have to produce written submissions for all of the hearings coming up. There are 5 hearings coming up, 2 of which we are not attending. The first 2 come tomorrow and the day after, and they are compulsory acquisition hearings for the other objectors besides the council, so we didn't feel the need to go to that, as we have adequate things to say in our D6 submission. But there are 3, one on Thursday, and that is about, you see, get the title right, construction and operational effects, non-traffic, which is about construction compound noise, waste management, Gammon Fields Travellers Site, and noise generally. And that's on Thursday, and we're attending that with a team. Then next Monday, there is one which is called the issue specific hearing number 9 on environment and biodiversity, which covers ancient woodland, the wilderness, Shaun Woods, which we're not involved in, Coalhouse Fort, whole farm community woodland, and the Water Framework Directive, and we've got a team going to that, and we're in preparation mode for that. And then the final one on tomorrow week will be the traffic and transportation one, which doesn't seem to have much in it. It's wider network impacts update, and that could mean anything. Bluebell Hill as well, and then it deals with a whole range of matters related to public rights of way and non-motorised users routes, and these are the footpaths that aren't actually designated as public rights of way. And all of that has got to be written up after the hearings to set out our case. So there are 3 documents like there were for deadline 4. There is all the commentary on those 143 documents in one document, plus anything else that we want to raise, answers to all the questions, and are submissions on the written hearings, and that's what we're gearing up to deal with all at the same time as commenting on what is now a 500-page statement of common ground from the council. It sounds a lot, but there's less to look at that's changed from the last version at deadline 4. But we have to submit that back to National Highways with our comments on Wednesday, close of play Wednesday. So that's all going on as well. And then it all starts again with deadline 7. So that's the practical side of everything. In terms of how do we think it's going, that's a difficult one. I mean, the examining authority, quite rightly, are fairly tight-lipped, and all you can do is assess the way they're questioning the applicant and ourselves and others, the questions they might ask in writing as well. And it must say the questions that are set out to be considered as part of the hearings coming up were much less complicated than we anticipated, which may or may not be a good thing. But judging how they feel about, I mean, the whole system is in favour of the applicant, as is the planning system generally. So it's not a surprise that the applicant gets more of a shout perhaps than everybody else. But in terms of the issues, obviously Orsett-Cock Junction and its performance or lack of performance is a major issue. We have a number of other issues related to the land holdings that are affected by the council and the replacement open space in particular. And we're having lots of side meetings with National Highways, and as is expected in the brinkmanship involved in the latter stages of a examination, they are beginning to respond and make a few minor changes to wording in key documents. The scheme itself, though, is not changing. So it's all about how the securing mechanisms are reworded for the most part. We are in the process of developing protective provisions, which are a specific schedule, usually at the back of the DCO order itself. These are being spearheaded by London Borough of Havering and TfL as their highway authority. We are likely to support their view, as will probably Essex and Kent. So all 4 local highway authorities will set out what they want in terms of protective provisions, and that protects the position of the local highway authority across the board if that can be agreed. We are also will be proposing a number of new requirements. Requirements are the same thing as planning conditions, and they are one of the methods of securing matters beyond the control documents and beyond the order itself. So we're proposing new requirements in respect of various matters there. We are getting slight movement on some of the replacement open land requirements that National Highways have to comply with. They are completely refusing to consider anything in the way of non-statutory compensation and mitigation for local residents affected by noise, construction disturbance, etc. They're saying that that's the remit of the Secretary of State, and they don't have any provision to allow them to go beyond that. So we do have to take a position soon, guided by Mark on this, about when they actually offer us the sale of the council land, which is partly open space, often parts of the highway and other bits and pieces of land. We need to consider our position as to whether we will consider that offer and proceed, or whether we're going to object throughout. And we've written to Mark about that, so we'll have further discussions on that. They have changed all the plot numbers, so what used to be 140 odd plots is now 733. It's the same area of land but split up differently. So we have to go through a process of trying to identify where all that is. There are a number of points that we might make to do with the wilderness, related to loss of biodiversity, potential impact on watercourses, and whether or not it's an ancient woodland, which it can't be defined as, which is unfortunate because it loses its policy protection because of that. We will be making a number of other points about the diversion of pedestrian and cycling routes during construction, and the adequacy of the diversion and replacement provisions. Trying to think what the other we have a lot of issues connected with local modelling, but I'm not a modeller, so I can't really go into that. We are still arguing with National Highways about changing or tweaking some of the provisions of the order itself, and bear in mind the order is a piece of secondary legislation, so it's quite important to get that right. Section 106, we are almost at a position where I can present something that officers are happy with to Mark for agreement, where we get where we can send our comments to National Highways about officer support contributions, which is part of the Section 106, and that would give the council, if it was accepted by National Highways, support for 6.5 years for 4 new officers that will then be targeted with helping National Highways get their additional consents. We are still concerned about the Dartford crossing, and in fact in our last submission pointed out that it is the main objective of the scheme, is to cause that to be free-flowing traffic and remove all the problems. They have reworded their objective slightly, and we still don't believe that it's likely to be achieved as an objective. So it is a fundamental point that we decided to make in D5 for the simple reason that D5 is a shorter submission, and therefore the comments that we might make have more impact than if they're lost in a 500-page report. I think that's probably a reasonable summary. It may be too much for everyone to take in at once. Maybe I'll stop there and see if there are questions.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you, Chris. I've been following the process, and yes, it's enormous. The amount of documents and paperwork that's associated with it is huge. I noticed you mentioned there's 27 questions that the council have. Was that right?
Yeah.
Should someone give me an example of one of those questions?
Oh, yes. Just a minute. Let me open the question list, and I will. I mean, there are lots. So there are 77 of them. Most of them go to the applicant, as is normal. But let me give you, rather than tell you the questions, I mean, I can send this to you if you're interested, but it covers traffic and transportation, traffic modelling questions. It covers air quality questions, geology and soil questions, quite a number on tunnelling considerations, waste materials, noise and vibration, road drainage, biodiversity, socioeconomic, the order itself, and the acquisition of land. So it covers pretty much all of the topics covered by the environmental statement, plus the order plus a few others to be thrown in, and climate change and the consideration of alternatives. But in this case, there are no questions in those two categories. Those were the contents list. I mean, if you'd like, I can forward to Jenny the PDF of all the questions, and you can have a look through yourself. They're so varied, it's difficult to pick examples, really. Does that help you at all, Councillor?
Yes, thank you, Chris. And I think, if you could forward that over to Jenny to forward it to the group, that would be fantastic. Can I open up to comments and questions from the rest of the task force? Anyone like to make a comment or question, Mark or Chris? Another question from me. On the hearing 10, 24 October one, the traffic and transport, I noticed you mentioned public rights of way. When National Highways last visited us as a task force, I asked them about if and when the timetable of these public rights of way would they be opening, or would they all be just shut off to the public until construction's finished, or open in stages? Have we had any more information on that during this process?
We have. We're still quite concerned, particularly in the Baker Street area, but there are other sections where footpaths, public rights of way, are shut or diverted for several months at a time, or even longer. And in some cases that is unavoidable if you're doing a major piece of work. But we have tried to make the diversion routes not desperately long, so that people, if they're out for a walk, they're out for a walk. So if it's a diversion route, you could argue that it's not very important if it's the same length. But we've tried to make it as least inconvenient as possible. But there are still a number of areas to go, and Steve will be identifying those in the next hearing that we've got on this, on Ish 10, as it's called.
Brilliant, thanks, Chris. Laura Rake.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of comments, really. I mean, Chris mentioned about the wilderness and the question of whether it's ancient woodland. Just to clarify to everybody, to be ancient woodland, you have to be able to provide evidence that the woodland was in existence in 1600. So it's not an easy thing to actually prove. So just because we haven't managed to get the evidence quite back far enough, doesn't mean to say that obviously it isn't an important woodland in terms of biodiversity and heritage and history, because of the link to Sir Richard Saltonstall, who was the Lord Mayor of London in the late 1500s. But on top of that, there's a new status, long established woodland, that is so new that the inventory is being prepared at the moment. It hasn't yet been published publicly, but we are pleased to say that the wilderness has actually been added to that new inventory. Although there aren't actually any protections associated with that as yet, because it is so new. But it was very interesting when we had the site visit as well with the examiners and interested parties to the wilderness, because we'd actually gone in there and put some markers out to show the extent of the order limits and how much is under threat and would potentially be lost. And the lead examiner asked National Highways to comment on the accuracy of the markers that we'd put out. The first one they said we'd got right, and then we walked round to the other side of the woodland, which the order limits come into a lot more. So it was quite an example of the scale of what would be lost. National Highways said that their GPS wasn't quite working in the woods, and that they'd have to do 3 words and then come back to us. Whether or not that was genuine, or whether or not that was because they didn't want to show the scale of the impact, obviously we don't know, but they have since confirmed that we did have both the markers correct. So the impact to the wilderness has been shown. So we are obviously working on that. I've had a meeting earlier with the Woodland Trust, who will be attending the relevant issue-specific hearing on Monday as well, to comment further on that. And then the other thing just to mention is that the Observer approached us as a group for comment on the fact that they'd been in touch with the Department for Transport, asking them about their commitment to the Lower Thames crossing. And the Department for Transport actually commented that it's a live DCO, so they wouldn't be making any further comment, which, although it's highly speculative, it has been raised by the fact that they didn't back away when they made the announcement in March about the rephasing by 2 years to say that they were at that point committed to it. So they didn't hide behind it's a live DCO, we're not commenting, when it suited them in March. So again, it is highly speculative. It was very interesting that the Observer were coming to us to ask us if we'd heard anything on that, and did actually run a story in the Observer Guardian on the 1st of October. So, yeah, who knows? Watch this space, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Laura. Just to add on more comments from myself, I'm very disappointed to hear, but not really surprised, that the compensation for residents will be the legal bare minimum. I think that has been what I think this task force has raised that in the past, where there are going to be some people who are going to have this literally right in their front or back garden, and they're not going to get anything in the form of monetary compensation above the legal limit. It's just astounding, really. But I'm not surprised. I thought there's been some really good questions raised in all of the hearings that I've listened to. I've been very pleased to see the level of the questions, but they're going back as well on highways and saying, no, we do need to have this question answered, and actually making sure that they're getting the answers they want for the process. It's really good. Laura, do you want to come in there?
Thank you. Yeah, you just mentioning the questions. Yes, I agree. They have been some cracking questions, and they have been holding National Highways accountable as well with pushing them for information. But just to also say that the examiners actually commented that they were dismayed about how big the gap is, and the lack of information and sort of meaningful engagement ongoing between the National Highways and local authorities and other interested parties and stakeholders, and some of the differences in the agreements and the issues. There's quite a big difference between the two opposing sides. So it's kind of interesting times in that aspect.
They made that comment, Laura, in respect of Orsett Cock only, though.
Yeah, but I get the feeling, though, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but that in general, overall, there seems to be a lot of big issues that are still nowhere near being resolved.
Oh, that's certainly true, yes.
Yeah.
But they haven't commented on anything like that, except for Orsett Cock, that they were dismayed. They used that word too.
Yeah.
And Councillor, the question you raised about non-stat compensation and mitigation, we will be making a bit of a play about this in our D6 submission. There was the person in charge of the land and property section was also in charge of the land and property section for Tideway, and Tideway had an excellent non-stat system. So we will be highlighting key elements of not only that, but also what HS2 in the bit that's still being built has provided, because often they say, well, it's a public authority, we can't use this money. Well, they did it for HS2, even if Tideway was a private arrangement. So we will be making a bit of a play about the need for non-stat mitigation and compensation, and it is within the gift of the examining authority to ask for it, to ask for proposals to be put forward. And it is entirely within the Secretary of State's for it to be required. So if we make the point, it is entirely possible that we could, change the game on this one, but we'll see.
Thank you. Thank you both. Just another question. What was the reason given from going from around 140 map book pages to just over 700?
Oh, there's nothing sinister in it. It's just the fact that they've decided that they will split. It's easier to, instead of taking an entire area, only to use the area that they need. So what they've done is broken up what used to be land parcels in fairly large lumps into much, much smaller lumps, so that they're easier to manage, and you can be much more specific about what you want to do with each one. So there's nothing wrong with that in itself. It's just that we've now got to backfill it to find out to make sure that the 733 plots are actually tied into the previous 140 or whatever it was. So it's just a checking exercise, nothing sinister.
Thank you. Any other member of the task force need comment or question? One last one from me. The local road network has been very congested in and around the East Tilby ward in the last 8 days now due to a road closure at Muckingford Road, and this has been impacted by when the railway gates at Low Street have also had closures. These are two very key parts of where the Lower Thames Crossing actually interacts with our existing infrastructure. So I think it's just what the residents' feedback have been to me. I think it's only fair that we make sure our residents are aware of how much of an impact something like the Lower Thames Crossing, if it goes ahead, will have on our road impact, local road network. Got the words out.
Yes. I mean, we've highlighted all of that in our local impact report in quite a lot of detail. I mean, it stems from key junctions, but it runs past the junctions into some of the roads. So clearly we're concerned about Orsett Cock, we're concerned about Asda Roundabout, we're concerned about Manor Way, Five Bells, Daneholes, but actually there are congestion issues, we believe, on some of the local road network as a result of the congestion at those junctions. Right now, National Highways have never had to provide any mitigation for any major road impact or local road impact that is not part of the SRN, the Strategic Road Network. And so far they've managed to avoid that by saying that every highway authority has the ability to apply for funding to mitigate that impact via other processes. Now, given the recent decision on HS2 northern section, or one of its northern sections, there's more funding on other schemes, and there has been a Network North announcement, and I can put this in the chat, not in the chat, in the email I sent to Jenny, where it sets out that funding I think it's a 15% contribution from local highway authorities to big schemes is no longer being required and is funded by central government. Now, that's a commitment by this government. Whether it survives the next election, I don't know. But it does involve the east-facing slips. And it involves Bluebell Hill. And Bluebell Hill, from a Kent point of view, which is a supporter of the scheme, of the LTC scheme, this was a major stumbling block, and now it's been supposedly removed. How long that funding promise lasts, I don't know. And I don't know how much it will affect the ongoing business case and development of the east-facing slips scheme. But beyond that, there is no provision for any local road impact to be mitigated. And we've said all along that then places this council, along with many others, in an awkward position because we don't have any funding, and therefore the impact is something we just have to swallow and we can't deal with it. And we continue to make that point. So, but I can certainly put the Network North thing in the chat. I think I still have the link to it. Yes, I do. And it provides the report, and if you scroll down further down the link, it provides a list of all the schemes that now no longer need that 15% contribution from local authorities.
Thank you, Chris. That's very interesting about the 15% indeed, and something that's probably going to be quite fluid.
Well, indeed.
And
it only talks about ones that are at an outline business case, and it goes through the regions. So there's 3 schemes for the North East, a bunch for the North West, Yorkshire and Humber, East Midlands, West Midlands, East of England, South East, South West, and a few other strategic road network schemes. And Bluebell Hill is obviously in the South East, and just looking, for whereabouts the one for the east-facing slips is. I can't see it. Oh yeah, east-facing slips. It's in the East of England, number 4 in the East of England list. So yeah, it's potentially promising, but who knows?
Thank you. Any other? Councillor Spate.
Hi, Chris. It's not necessarily a question that relates specifically to immediate ongoing issues, but it's been noticeable of late that the Freeport is starting to flex its muscles, for want of a better phrase, and is starting to engage with local communities and talk about some infrastructure issues that are happening, or they or the communities that they serve would like to see happening. What if any, profile has Freeport had in terms of the hearing process? Because, you know, here we've got another huge, great government quango, for want of a better phrase, now sort of being thrown into the mix and asked to do things, and certainly Lower Thames Crossing is going to have a significant impact on their plans and ambitions, I would have thought. I just wondered if they'd had any profile or if they're speaking out at all.
No is the answer, simply, but I'll explain that comment. The Freeport, of course, doesn't have a planning status at present. It only has a tax status, and the planning status will come, I'm sure. Nevertheless, we have been in close discussions with the Port of Tilbury and with DP World on the Gateway, not with Ford Motor Company, just the 2 ports. And we have reached a measure of agreement and joint approach at various hearings and in written submissions, particularly the last written submission. We had a joint paper between National Highways, Essex County Council, DP World, Port of Tilbury and ourselves. Now, I think the examining authority was seeking a measure of agreement, but what they got in that paper, which was signed off by everybody, and that took a little bit of effort, was it was a bit like a statement of common ground. This is where we agree and this is where we disagree, and there was an awful lot of disagreement. So we have been having almost weekly meetings, if not more, with Port Tilbury and DP World. DP World are particularly interested in Manor Way, but that's because it's affected by the failure of Orsett Cock. Port of Tilbury is interested in Orsett Cock particularly, and as to Roundabout, less so about Manor Way. But we have been engaging with them and have a very close relationship with them, their lawyers and their traffic modellers. And I think it's fairly obvious to National Highways that that's the case. So whilst the Freeport hasn't been involved as such, the ports have, and the ports have engaged their, in the case of Port of Tilbury, lawyers, and in the case of DP World, it's a KC at the hearings and advising them all the way through.
Thank you.
Does that help you? Yep. Okay, good.
Mark Bradbury.
Yeah, I just want to make one comment in relation to something Chris said earlier in his summary. He referred to land disposals by the council and the potential for that. As with everything else in the process, obviously the examiners are keen that as much as possible is agreed between the parties, rather than being left for them to determine. Obviously, the CPO process would follow any planning decision. We are being encouraged to negotiate in terms of land disposals. There are benefits to selling plots earlier in the process from the point of view of having cash in the bank, but there are probably more benefits from entering into option agreements. That means that we're not committed to selling it if it doesn't happen. But the advantages of a negotiated approach through an option are that we can place some conditionality on what happens, rather than a CPO process which takes that control away from us. So it's likely that we will negotiate, but as with any other land disposal, that will not be an officer decision. That will need to come through a report to Cabinet to enter into an agreement. Individually, plots may fall below a key decision threshold, but together they're likely to be above that. So I will happily keep this group informed of where we're at with that. But as I say, if we decide to recommend to members that they enter into options, that's likely to be in a Cabinet report. I may choose to put something on the forward plan to allow us to move that through, but I haven't got to that point yet. But again, I'll keep you informed. But as I say, there is generally the advice is to negotiate, but to not dispose in advance, simply because if it doesn't happen, you've lost control of that land. You've sold it on the basis of its current value rather than its future value. But there is merit in at least negotiating and seeing what conditionality we can place on it to say, well, if you buy this land, we'd like you to do this, which, as I say, in a CPO process, you won't have that ability. But I'll keep you posted and make sure that you're abreast of that. And obviously, if that happens in between this meeting and the proposed January meeting, we can put that in a written update and respond to any questions outside of the meeting. Or if needs be, we can always call the meeting back to have a special on disposal.
Mark, there might be a timing issue with this, because obviously when the DCO goes through government processes and is made, perhaps in June is the date next year, it comes with its CPO already part of it. So at that point, the decision to do options agreement elapses, because it's part and parcel of it. They just get the land as part of the DCO. And therefore, in order to, and you're quite right, the options agreement is the recommended approach, and that's what we've written to you about. But we would need to engage on this pretty quickly during the examination in order to have some, because once the examination finishes, we lose all control, and there is no option after that to do too much with it at all. So it's only 2 months left, I know, but if anything needs to go through committee process, it needs to be done fairly quickly, I think.
Yeah, that's understood, Chris. It's why I referenced the possibility of putting this on the forward plan, so that we have got it in the system if we need it to do that. But I'm not going to issue instructions via a public meeting, but I will be responding to you. And I think you know from what I've said where my view is going, so that we can move forward with this.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. That's very kind.
Thank you both. I can't speak for everyone, but I think the optional, conditional one sounds like the best option. If the scheme doesn't go ahead, you don't want national highways effectively having a big slab of your green belt and no road to put it on. It'd be a bit of a strange situation to be in. So, if I could ask the task force just kept up to date on that as much as possible, please, throughout the process. Because as you say, when we next meet, it's going to be likely to be the process has ended that stage and we're going into the next stage.
When is the next meeting, Councillor? Do you know?
I think we do have one on the calendar for November, but it depends on if there's going to be sufficient business.
Is it the 13th?
I haven't got a calendar to hand quickly, but yeah, we'll check that and maybe put it on the email that we circulate that Jenny's going to send out.
Because at that point, if it is the 13th, that's just before deadline 7, and if then the next one in December is on the 11th, that's just before deadline 9. So from a LTC point of view and an update of the task force, the next two meetings probably do coincide well with where we are in the system.
Mark, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, Chris, we decided that we weren't going to have update meetings until we had a recap of the whole scheme. But what I've suggested is that if we needed to reinstate one of those meetings or have a special meeting to deal specifically with land disposals, we had the option to do that. But if we can deal with it by correspondence, we will. As I say, this group will not be making decisions about land disposals, but as with any other form of, I mean, this is not a scrutiny group, but I would certainly want your input into that, bearing in mind the history of this group on the event. But in principle, I think we're all agreed that using the land disposals process to see if we can get better deals beyond simply the land it is the right way forward, because it doesn't commit us to sell the land if the scheme doesn't progress, but it gives us options that are not available through CPO. But we'll keep you posted, and if I feel in discussion with the chair that we want to call a meeting to agree an approach, we can do that. But in terms of updates, the intention is to have in the way that this is a half-time report, is to have a full-time report once the process is concluded.
If you need written interim updates like we've done in the past, then happy to help with that.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you both. If we just keep us updated to make sure we all know what's going on and where we are in the process, and as and when these land deals, or a better word, are being put forward. Any other member comment or question online? Just want to put it on record that say I've been watching a lot of this process, and say thank you very much to the officers and the team and to the Thames Crossing Action Group. The representation you've put into this has been quite impressive. So I'm really it's really good to see. So thank you very much for that, to put it on record.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you to Mark too for the nice comments earlier on.
Unless anyone's got anything else to add. With that, that concludes the business of the meeting this evening. I now declare the meeting closed at 18:47 p.m. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.